Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Welcome to season 25 of the podcast. Quick heads up for listeners, the release schedule is going to be somewhat fluid this season, but we've got some great episodes in the queue. I'm very excited to kick things off today with a conversation about Chief of War, the Hawaiian historical drama starring Jason Momoa. And my guest is production designer Jean-François Campeau. Jean-François, welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you. Thank you, Kid. Nice to be here.
Very glad to have you here. One of the reasons I'm excited about this episode is because I also have two very special co-hosts. First, Kalewa Correa. You're a curator of Hawaii and the Pacific with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. Welcome.
Aloha, folks. Nice to be here.
Also joining us is Halena Kapuni-Reynolds. You're a museum curator of Native Hawaiian history and culture. Really glad you could join us as well.
Kevelina Kealoha Kako. Really great to be here too.
This is going to be fun. Warning for listeners, this series finished its run on Apple TV Plus just this week. And today's conversation could potentially contain spoilers for the entire 9-episode series. Nothing is off the table when talking about production design. But first, Jean-François, you shared with us that you're also known as JF. Is it okay if we call you that?
Yes, please do so.
All right. Thanks, JF. To start us off, how did you become involved with this project? And what was your initial response to what you saw on the page?
Hey, it started like it starts most of the time by a phone call or email from a producer I had just completed a feature film with. It was called Molly Allen. We just did a film in Europe for Netflix. And my reaction, I was very excited, but also very intimidated. You know, it's not always exciting when you get a project proposition, but this one was incredibly exciting, but also very intimidating. So I think they had they were already going. There was a director on board, and of course, with Jason, with his creative partner, and Doug was there, and Justin Chan as a director. I think there was some kind of start before with different producers, or I don't know exactly what happened. I had to deep dive because, to be honest, I like everybody, I knew not too much about Hawaii. I've been there. I love it, of course, but about the culture itself. So as usual, the first step is to just pitch some kind of approach to the creative partners to even see if there's, a common vision or something interesting. So when I got the script, I was really overwhelmed. And then I deep dived into research and sourcing in a very focused way, of course, not totally broad, but very based on the script. And I was super inspired. So I just created this deck and I shared with the guys, and I met them and I pitched my vision a little bit, because I know this one is much more significant culturally. But as for every historical pieces I've done before, it's one thing to do the historical research, but you also need to find an angle on the subject, that usually the script gives to you. So maybe for you, Kalewa and Halena is very naive, but just diving in there, what really struck me was the juxtaposition of the mana and the kapu, which to me represented the poetry and the polytheist approach of God is in everything, infuses nature and it's part of the world. And the kapu that I kind of felt as a really man-made structure of laws that can, it's very common to all humans. But so there was this very, this juxtaposition and opposition, which I also felt in the script a lot, because you go from ultra-violence to poetry. And so that really struck me as it seems a little bit abstract, but it's just when you start designing or thinking about a show, you have to make constantly all kinds of decisions that are very subjective, that could be, left or right or this or that. So it's just kind of an inspiration that pushes you through. So that's what really struck me and I thought was beautiful about the scripts and the culture in general.
That's fantastic, actually, that you're able to get that through the script. Looking at, mana and kapu as a guide through the film and looking at it as just sort of a way of life here that I think oftentimes people looking at pre-contact Hawaii don't often think about, that we had this society that was set up very structured with a very structured set of laws. So it's great that that was coming through in just the imagery in the script alone.
Yeah, definitely something that I saw throughout the film as well, well, the series. And when you were talking about this juxtaposition, I could also see it manifesting in kind of the genre of war films, right? Because this is a film about a chief going to war. And so these extremes of violence and yet these beautiful moments of intimacy with people are something that you see within not just these kind of films, but experiences of war throughout history.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's totally universal.
So as you approach this material during that pre-production phase, JF, what assistance or what role was there, if any, for Hawaiian cultural advisors or folks who could help explain these concepts beyond just what was on the page?
It was quite crucial because, we always every project starts with the research process, contemporary or historical, of course. So in this case, the Hawaiian culture being mainly oral makes the whole process a little bit different and more interesting. But to put it precisely in details, the first thing every crew member, anyways, of the art department had to do is spend numerous hours in the Bishop Museum, which was the first step for even, and we had great help there from Marquise, who you guys probably know. So we could reach out, and to be honest, I mean, it's went through me at the beginning, but there's a lot of departments involved in a show like this. I have a prop department, set decorator, there's the greens, there's the sculpture. So everyone had their own questions. And to be honest, sometimes the information came, I don't know exactly where, but we had the resources were provided. But Marquez was a great help at the beginning. We also had Keone Nunes. I don't know if you know him, but he was also a very resourceful help. And for all the keys, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but we had Lionel Grant, who's a Maui in Aotearoa, and they basically used to, have more answers about very precise objects or proceedings, but also about the scripted. I mean, not just for us, but let's say there's the episode 5, I think, or 3, the wedding scene, for example. They would basically explain to us what the practice was, and then of course Paha would make decisions, because in the end Paha was kind of signing off creatively on what was scripted, because that's what I'm working with basically. But we had a lot of resource people we could go to for questions or precisions about all the we needed to know. Yes.
Did you feel that because the series itself is both filmed in Hawaii and in New Zealand, did you feel that there were very much cultural similarities, or were they very different when you had to actually navigate those sort of cultural norms from the two different spaces that you guys were filming?
I think what struck me is the similarity and the relationship between the cultures that I really lived. What was really difficult was, honestly, when I got to New Zealand, it's not like I was an expert in Hawaii, but I've been there for, a few weeks. I scouted a lot, been to all the islands. I know the landscapes. We discussed these subjects. So honestly, when I showed up to New Zealand, I was a little bit depressed because it's even the vegetation, the bush is not the same. And I think now it's okay. I speak with most people. They're like, we can't really tell the difference. I could tell. I'm sure you guys could tell. It's so obvious. And the water and the beaches, like we have those big tidal beaches they have in New Zealand. They photograph beautifully, but it's so different from the Hawaiian coastline. But I think in the end it blends in nicely. But culturally, no. I mean, it really was intricate, and the way I think. Anyways, we had a lot of Maori cast on the show, so it just made total sense. I don't think that probably wasn't the initial reason we ended up in New Zealand, which was much more practical and down to earth. But in the end, culturally, it made so much sense. And I think it almost enriched the experience, we were all hoping to do the whole show in Hawaii, basically. But I don't think culturally it hurt it from my very modest point of view. I'm not, but I don't know what you guys think, but if you feel it in the show. But
JF, I'm a guy who couldn't tell the difference between the scenes shot in New Zealand, but these guys, as you alluded to, they did notice the difference. All three of you talk a little bit about what was different for someone who's going back and watching it again, and kind of the challenges of knitting these different locations together. I'd like to hear more about that.
Well, I think for folks who grew up in Hawaii, I mean, if you grew up in the place, you're gonna know where some of these locations are, and recognizing that it's a Hollywood production, like you're not gonna get the exact places right for all kinds of various reasons. But, in terms of getting the essence of Hawaii and some of the landscapes that a lot of these events took place on, I think the film really does capture all of these different facets of Hawaii's geography. I also noticed, JF, in another interview you did, that you talked about creating these juxtapositions and even in the environment for those different kingdoms, which was really exciting to see, right? Because again, it's also trying to expose people to these different, maybe not so familiar environments when they think of the image of Hawaii in their minds.
Honestly, that was my big fight and one of the big loss of not shooting everything in Hawaii. Because it's, as you say, it's difficult, to differentiate and also the reshoot was that kind of was part of the reshoot issue, because I think that's not me, but the higher ups people and the scenario realized that we had to create a little bit more clarity in the geopolitical aspect of what was going on. At the beginning, we thought we would do a Kauai, the Hokulea temple or a big landmark like that, which we had a perfect location in New Zealand. It was like a dream, And I know Jason sent it to numerous people in Hawaii who they said, yes, we would go for that. It totally makes sense. But then the story shifted and we decided to be pre-Hokulea, before the temple, the Heiau was built. We kind of lost that. That was a big landmark that would have helped us. So I think one of it kind of, so building in the reshoots, building Kahu in the stronghold, which kind of was a liberty a little bit, but it just anchored the story a little bit more geopolitically, because then you would establish the death of the king, and then you understand what's happening between, Kamehameha and what's the god of war and the power that's split and all we kind of, how would I say, we used geopolitics a little bit to compensate the lack of being able to shoot every island like it would have been so perfect to do, which in our production side of things, it would be totally impossible or extremely prohibitive.
Just for the listeners, for their context, so what JF is talking about is a temple that was constructed on the west side of the island of Hawaii called Pu'ukohola. And it is one that Kamehameha I instructs his people to craft as part of his conquest. But, JF, if you were able to have that scene with Pu'ukohola and build out that set, can you imagine kind of what were some of the thoughts that you may have had when you were initially thinking about that? Like, how would I build out this huge heiau for these particular kinds of scenes?
I mean, I was super excited, I mean, I remember one day because I went there a few times, obviously, and once with Jason and the gang, and there's one point of view down the coast where you drive and you see it from a distance. There was just like, okay, just don't mess it up, But I was in pre-prep before we would. So my main concern, I mean, Herb Kani, the painter and waterman, I mean, his paintings are great of this article. I don't know if from a historic point of view for you guys this is valid, but to me I thought it was super rich and super inspiring. So we were like ambitious. I mean, we had the hilltop. We were almost building, like 2/3 of the scale. It was so that was replaced basically by Koala temple that you see in the series just by the cliff, because they decided to tell the story of Kamehameha a little bit, previous to, as you said, the unification of all the islands and all that.
Since we're on the topic of the temples, it might be great if you talk a little bit more about what it was like to create the Koala Temple set, because a lot of the sets that you were creating for this were built and you didn't rely a lot on those digital effects. What was that like?
As you said, the idea was to try not to rely on visual effects as much as possible, to stay, at least if it wasn't, in this case, I mean, for some of the sets we were in Hawaii, but this one not, to at least have the coastline, the proximity to the water, be in nature. It just went with the thing I was saying at the beginning about the mana, as a concept of designing stuff, it just meant trying to at least shoot in the elements and be exposed as much as possible, at least, so because we always tend to do differently on big, the bigger the production gets, the more you're driven to shoot either on stage where it's totally controlled, or at least a backlot where you control absolutely also all the elements. So of course, it's a big challenge for a production to shoot big sets with numerous casts on natural events. This location was particularly tricky on numerous sides. Geologically, because we're right on the cliff, it looked quite scary from the water. We looked like we could have landslides anytime. We had to go through a geological engineer to reassure everyone. Also, culturally, not just this location, but all the locations. We had to ask the Maori tribes, if they were okay with us doing that there. So it's a whole process of just first arriving there, and it's like Hawaiian culture meeting the Maori culture just in general. We were greeted, they were greeted. There were constantly exchanges for every set, especially this one. Or if you look at, like, for example, the Spilled Brain episodes, there's a beach where we're depicting a very violent scene. It's like the Hawaiian, they have like sacred sites, and most of them are. And so the whole process of this one was a little bit complex. We just took some dialogue, but then everyone was happy in the end. I don't know if you notice also the Ku, the god of war, which is the central key of the temple, is carved with the Oia Leua tree, exactly, which is a native tree of Big Island specifically, and unique only to Hawaii. It doesn't grow anything anywhere else.
Ohia is one of our prominent trees, especially on the island of Hawaii, but it is important for our watersheds. Definitely a fine hardwood that's continually carved today and used in religious images, even today.
So what we did is they actually took one tree, we shipped it to New Zealand, because Lionel Grant he's a Maori sculptor, very renowned, and he also teaches sculpture, I think, in Hawaii to young Hawaiians and all that. So he was really our cultural advisors for everything related to the keys, because it's the same way, there are so many gods, but also so many different representation of the same god. Of course, there's basic features that keep coming back, but it's like, who am I to say what's, it's very difficult. So he kind of did the lineup for us of what would be appropriate. And then, so they shipped the tree trunk to New Zealand, and he had a few of his Hawaiian students, carvers, came to Aotearoa, and they had this whole workshop where it was sculpted. And then we installed it, but covered it, because they had to be, everything was blessed. Everything we crafted that was culturally authentic as much as we could, like the kaha, the wakas, the double hull boat also. So we blessed all those keys the morning of June 9th in Hafitu, and they had a few elders also come from Hawaii. Honestly, I couldn't remember who they were exactly, but there was a whole delegation, and it was really done it doesn't show in the TV series, because they make choices and it's very spectacular, and I'm sure even there's some stuff that could be shocking to some Hawaiian people who are quite aware of their culture, Kaikili and his bone tower. I don't know, I'm just imagining this, you guys tell me, but there's a whole process that was underneath what's in the end result that you don't see on the screen, that I think was, authenticity was also mostly about respect, then it's about trying to do it as authentic as possible in the craft, because to honor the craft, because the Hawaiian craft is incredible, but there was also an underlying code that was more about respect that doesn't show, but that was really part of the process.
So protocol was pretty much built into every set that you folks did, which is pretty unique, I think, for, a Hollywood feature series like this. Yeah, I think that's something that, for us here in the Pacific, that's really important to show that sort of level of protocol and respect that we try to do here within our islands and archipelagos here. I just wanted to ask a quick question, a personal one to you, JF, about, out of all the sets that you did you have one that was maybe your favorite, or maybe your favorite, or maybe one that was the most challenging that you worked on, or something like that? One of those. Let's go with favorite.
I think favorite is the koala ehau. I think just for the complexity, and I mean I had to fight for it a little bit, and shooting on that location, and yeah, I would say I would say my favorite one. There's also really small sets, like for example, during the wedding scene, there's like a mating hut, so where we had to create this way of representing. It's almost like you have to show the villagers that the king, they're actually trying to copulate, because we want to hear and all that. So, I mean, in a very metaphoric way to play with the kappa and the kukui nuts. And so that small set I really enjoyed also drawing. Yeah, the most challenging, I'd say, would be the Kahu stronghold, we call it. I realized it's probably I know there was giant huts, like just for the canoe storage huts, for example. I'm not sure, there was that many big as a meeting point, like a giant hut as a meeting point. But story-wise, it just made so much sense. We wanted to show how the king is old, he's fragile, but he's protected. And it just brought up the whole stakes of when he dies, what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. So it really helped explain the story. But it was a big challenge because we had to do that in New Zealand because it was a backlot shoot, not in context. It was winter there. As you know, everyone's very lightly dressed. So this one, I kind of compromised. I'm like, okay, we'll do it on a backlot. We won't build it on the cliff. And it was too big to build. So I just built like parts of it and we extended. But then we even had to shoot on stage. So yeah, this one was a big challenge just to pull off and try to keep believable. But we put the same intention in the craft and the lashing and the attaching, and we went through the same process. It's just that the poles were like telephone pole size. It was a massive one.
The other thing that this conversation makes me think of is a lot of the scenes where they're consulting with Ke'eaumoku's court, right? They're in an open thatched style structure. But as you're talking, it made me realize, perhaps that choice was more so for the filming, right? Because if you're in a really small interior thatched space and trying to have those discussions, it might not come across in the film itself. But with the open structure, you can see the full bodies, the full conversations, the environment that's surrounding it. So that's a really great context.
Yeah, no, because I mean, it's all about the architecture is basically about the stone platforms and the huts, but the hut is very adapted to life, but it's not that interesting visually. So the stylistic bias I took was to always try to exploit more the open gable side of the huts. Like you see the spectator hut, for example, so because if you don't do that, or else you end up with just basically touching in a very low line, and even there's stuff we compromise, like I remember the advisors, cultural advisors would tell us stories about if the higher rank the person was in the hut, like a royal hut, for example, a sleeping hut, the lower the door would be. Because then you had to bend so much down to get in, it would put you in a submissive position, so to cut the danger a little bit. But, when you want to shoot that, it's just end up in a black hole. So we really exploited the open gable of the huts, trying to create graphic rhythm also with structure. I mean, we played with like the stronghold is a good example, like where you have a cross gable. I tried to push it as much as, it made sense, but just to keep it visually appealing and, as you say, open to the outside as much as possible.
JF, you mentioned in passing the Bone Tower, which was a central part of what was set in Oahu. While you didn't say that was your most complicated set, in the context of everything we've been talking about, I just imagine that there was a lot to pull that off and a lot of discussion about how you were going to pull that off. Can you go deeper into sort of what it took to make the final decisions and get that on film?
Originally, it's in the script, I think it was described as a bone hut, but not as in, where they would put the remains of, because I think in general, the idea was more to hide the bones in nature somewhere else where you didn't want anyone to find them, basically. So I was struggling with this, like if it felt more like a catacomb concept to me, like a European catacomb where you put the bones and all this. So, but I totally understand the story point of Kaikili being so, thirsty for war and vengeance. And that's where the idea of the tower came from, a little bit as a metaphor of the, the lele, you call them, like the offering towers you often have in the a house, like and some advisors would explain to me metaphorically they were kind of antennas you would use to communicate with the gods, which don't make sense, giving offerings and all that. So that's conceptually where it started, and we're like, okay, then that's his whole point. His profanation, we say in French, of the bones of his, not even his enemies, just like victims, basically, and trying to. He says it himself anyway in the series, to give it to the gods, to give him more power, and so he's the prophesied one and all that. But more technically, yes, it was a challenge because, as you can guess, we always have like 3, 4, 5 days per location. It's not like you can shoot, come back 2 months later. I mean, first of all, we had people molding bones for weeks, so we had a very, very big molding shop, and then we kind of pre-build it in parts that we could crane in, off, and multiple states. Because I mean, what I wanted to make sure is that it looked like they were building it. So I think we kind of achieved that in episode 3, I think, where you see it's building up. And it was a challenge, and it was also a very difficult location. A lot of these locations are super exposed to the wind. You're right on the ocean. You guys know what that could be like. You see it in some scenes. You see the wind, the elements is really strong. But that was nothing. Some days we were building, we had to, the crew had to stop because, And we had Gabrielle, I think, which was a typhoon that passed by. It didn't hit that set, but it hit the spectator hut. But it was intact, So it survived big winds.
I definitely think that stylized idea of Kahikili consolidating power sort of came out through those scenes, specifically with the Eevee there and stuff, even though that's not really what would normally happen, but you could feel like he's consolidating power in everyone that he's taking out. He's adding to his tower and basically, trying to fulfill that prophecy that he thinks he's a part of. But yeah, I think that shone through in those scenes.
Even I think I actually watched one episode yesterday, or he's like, I need new bones, or I need more bones, or he actually says it, when he starts getting into a riff with the Kupule, his son.
Yeah, if I want to take a minute to backtrack a little bit, back to our discussion on the Ku image and the Ohia tree, because I think this speaks back to the similarities of not just cultures, but landscapes, right? Indeed, Ohi'alehua is unique to the Hawaiian Islands, but I know in New Zealand, they also have a similar tree called the Pohutukawa. And so having that element, especially in the shots, really helped to make that visual connection, that it kind of looks like they're going through the same kind of trees, but not. And then thanks also for the context on the carvers and the protocols that went into place, because that really helps me to understand authenticity, not just in the form of the sets and the culture, but of the relationships between those who are a part of the project, right? That people genuinely were trying to follow these kind of protocols and have these conversations and to work across Maori and Hawaiian communities, which have a very strong connection to each other to make this film.
Yes, totally. Another good example of the authenticity in the craft is the Waha, which is the double hull ship you see Kayana sailing at the very beginning of the episode, which was blessed, and we call the Kahuka Iloa, which means the long journey. Sorry if I totally destroyed that. But same thing, we built that tree in Hawaii from scratch, from tree trunks. It was sculpted, the sails were hand weaved. But to echo back to what you just said, I mean, it involved all the communities of the islands of the Pacific, because all the hand weaving, just for set deck, we had to do like the baskets, the mats, the sails on this ship are all hand weaved. You need to go back to where there's still people still do it, and there's the expertise. So I was lucky enough to have a very good decorator in Hawaii and also in New Zealand who was very familiar with the Pacific Islands. So it was a lot of different people from different crafts from the Pacific who made this happen. And same thing with that boat. I mean, we built it from scratch. We had the ceremony. We blessed it. It's, I think, in June 2023. Like 16 people got on it in Oahu, just in that little port, and had a ride. Yeah, we did a second one also. But for the rest, a lot of stuff we cheated. But yeah, this was one of the things I'm pretty. We were all pretty proud of. I think they're all like standing by in New Zealand somewhere. Or no, actually, these are in Hawaii because we brought them back for the reshoot.
It was interesting while I was watching the series that some of the forest scenes and stuff, while I know that they're in Aotearoa, because we've had so much habitat loss here in Hawaii, it got me thinking that perhaps some of our forests actually look like this. I know we have very similar ferns, maybe not as tall as they have in Aotearoa, but it did get me start to think about, we're talking about stories that are coming from pre-contact Hawaii and their oral stories. And just to reimagine the landscape in my own mind, sort of through this series, kind of, just got me thinking about maybe there was stuff here that was happening that we no longer see because of all the change that we've had in our island. So I thought that was kind of interesting to really think about environment and ecosystem loss through this film as it's telling this historical story too, as a modern day place in the Pacific, So I thought that was something that got me thinking and wanting to research more even on environment, about the pre-contact stories about what environment was like, because there's that focus on the iliahi tree and sandalwood. And so I think that that's a great scene about talking about trade and what was happening and why people were really here and what they were looking for. So I don't know if you want to speak to anything about the iliahi scenes or any of the environmental scenes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just like you just said, going back to what I said before, my first contact arriving there, scouting was a little bit, I wasn't positive. But then you realize, I think, above all, as you say, is like it's the nature in a more primitive way. And it gave us the opportunity to at least embrace nature more than if we would have been in the Hawaiian context, basically. So on top of the, of course, cultural links we spoke before, just the quantity of coastal land in New Zealand, it's so huge, because they also didn't preserve. It's like Hawaii. I mean, I think, of course, Hawaii is much more developed and the population is so dense. There's like, 3 to 5 million people in New Zealand or something like that. 3 million, it's very tiny. And the coastline is massive. So the good side is you let go a little bit of very maybe encyclopedic reference to vegetation or but then, and also what was exactly the vegetation, as you just said, Kalewa, and end of the 18th century in Hawaii, maybe not exactly what we're thinking of. So I think in the end was good to take that liberty, but to be able to shoot much more in nature, close to a big center, which would have been really difficult, or you go to Big Island, you're like, okay, let's just bring this massive production and shoot it all there, which would have been great, and which I thought I was signing up for, but but yeah, no, you're right. I think in the end, the show just gives an environmental richness to it that ended up being a good thing.
Shifting a little bit to another set, thinking of the battle scenes on the lava fields, because there's so much lava. Where do you decide to have these scenes? Like, what were some of the things you folks were looking for in preparation of those?
This was, this scene is a Jason directed episode. So he was adamant about shooting that for real in Hawaii, not negotiable. And the thing that's a little bit weird is that we did that at the very beginning because the plan was to shoot everything in Hawaii. But then we're like, okay, if we need to do some of it in New Zealand, I needed time to build because I think also everyone kind of underestimated, as Kalewa said before, there was the intention of also show that it's a civilization, there's builds, there's structures. I mean, I would have liked to do even more. There's some VFX shots. We try to avoid VFX, but just to give that aspect, where you feel there's dwellings, there's agricultures, there's irrigation, it's a whole system, there's a whole structure, So basically, to go back to the question, we had to decide, what to shoot in Hawaii and what to build in New Zealand. The logic quickly came that, all the bigger builds we will do in New Zealand, in context, in nature, by cliff, by the ocean. But Jason really wanted to shoot that in Kahu, right there, just by the ocean. So it was a feast. Honestly, my personal implication is that was more creating the key concept art. I just basically walk around all day with him and a few colleagues and like framing shots and then pre-visioning the key art for the VFX, so the whole eruption and all that. On the day, it just involved like, massive amount of flame bars. They put in the cracks of the lava so many mats VFX had to erase, because imagine all these guys throw themselves on the rock, all day long. It was so, but at least the environment and the energy was there. And it's crazy because just the night before we were supposed to shoot, Mauna Loa, I think, or I don't know if it's this one or the other volcano, erupted. I know you guys are used to it, but this time it was in 2022 during October, I think. It was a little bit bigger, there were ashes and people were worried. There's warning, better to stay home, not to go there. So they canceled the shoot for 1 or 2 days, I don't remember. So they also had like a sign from, Jason and Paul were like, oh my God, what's this? But then it also had implications because we lost 2 days in Hawaii. Then I was hoping to shoot Ninole Cove, the other side, which is beautiful, where the black lava meets the ocean and there's vegetation. It's so beautiful. But we had 2 days planned there for the Kahu scenes, which ended up in New Zealand. Which that was the most painful, trying to depict Kahu in New Zealand was like, it's really hard. So, but at least we got the lava battle was spectacular and all in context.
I love that you mentioned the Mauna Loa eruption and how you folks are filming when this happened, because this is a mountain that doesn't erupt every year. It's every few decades. I was actually living in Volcano Village when it happened, and so I could just see the red glow behind my house. I want to spend a little bit of time on that, going to these really special places for production and these kinds of events happening. Were there any other instances where maybe we can frame it as nature responding to the filming on set in these places? Did you have any other experiences like that?
This was the most striking one for sure. The other one was I mentioned briefly before, but the Gabrielle typhoon in New Zealand was pretty spectacular also. It was, we had to stay home for a day. Basically, the whole city, Auckland, was shut down. You couldn't even go out because there were massive floods. But yeah, no, I say that no, the volcanic eruption is definitely much more symbolic. But you see, it just made it was a whole subject. Basically, even the relationship with nature and the sets and all that. So the one in Hawaii was even much more special, but yeah.
I was hoping to bring up a different set and talk about like maybe what the feeling on that set was when you guys did the shoot, which is specifically the Metcalf set where he ends up taking grape shot, putting it into the cannons and firing into the village, right? I mean, basically that is the account of Metcalf and Oluwalu, which is supposed to be on Maui, but my understanding is that they took a little bit of liberty to show it on Hawaii Island, so it would be Ka'iana seeing the results of Metcalf's expulsion and stuff. So just more from I wanted to kind of get like, what was the air on the set when you folks were actually filming that, or what were the feelings on that set? Because that is such a significant part of Hawaiian history and really some of the, I wouldn't say first contact, but contact between, traders coming in and that type of interaction where you have these people coming together. So when you folks were filming that, like what was the air on the set?
To be honest, I live more the process of the prep, than the shoot itself. But as I mentioned that before, I mean, I think first off, just narratively, like the way it's depicted in the series, I think in reality, the Hawaiians actually went out on the water to the ship, I mean, that's what I heard anyway. I don't know if the recollection, but they kind of were attracted to it basically on water, so which was way too complicated to stage for us. So that was one compromise. The island, as you say, was another one. But for me, when I realized how serious, I mean, what I feel in your question, like to be reenacting this, I felt it more when I saw it, finished the scene, and also the prep, where we had the discussion with the Maori tribe who were on this piece of land, which is very special. And that's what we wanted to depict and the way we wanted to do it also. I mean, so there was a whole discussion about what is it we're talking about, which I think we got the sympathy, on that side. That was fine. And then how do we do it? Because we're also doing it in a very sacred place, and you don't want to start putting squibs and explosions everywhere. So it was very delicate ballet of what's possible and what's not, and also the production, reality of it, of pulling it off. No, I didn't have the chance to be physically there when it was all being shot. I missed that one.
So, JF, thank you again for this wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot about the set production and design for Chief of War. And, to end, we just wanted to give you an opportunity to reflect a little bit more on the series. What do you hope Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander audiences will feel when they see the world you've created on screen?
It's kind of twofold. I hope they feel a lot of respect and care and the way things were depicted. I hope like I was saying before, the whole layers of the process that are not actually on the screen kind of breathe through it, and you kind of feel it in the way things are depicted, and the craft and the architecture and all that. I also hope it's I mean, I think Paul and Jason said that anyways. I mean, the whole idea also is if the Hawaiian and all the Pacific Island people, the culture, they feel more empowered to put their culture up front and to do large scale projects, putting it up front and putting it en valeur, we say in French. That would be great, I mean, the metaphor, the parallel is very weak, I'm like a French Canadian, but it's the same thing, it's like when, I'm not trying to trace any parallel, but just culturally, mass culture versus a bit more specific culture. You tend to always want to go mainstream, American, Hollywood, of course. So I think hopefully this is a good, inspiring example that you could bring something culturally significant and still be in the canon of very universal entertainment, and people, it's compelling. So, I mean, if that could be that's more than my job, of course. But I mean, globally, if the show could get there, then I think that would be a very positive point.
Absolutely. I mean, just in the last few months of listening to different conversations and different perspectives on the film, it's definitely one that has sparked lots of discussion in our community around revitalization of different crafts, of people wanting to actually look into these histories now and to learn more about them themselves. It's creating a major impact for a lot of folks.
I think I'm going to follow up on that one too, what Halena had said, and just more of you working, not just working in these islands, but actually living in them for a period of time. I would say, like, what do you think you took away from this project, and how, if anything, has it impacted you as a person, not only in your career, but as just in life? Like, are there things that you're taking away or that you learned from, being with Native Hawaiians, being with Maori, being in Hawaii, being on Aotearoa? What for you really resonates with these islands?
I mean, yeah, Hawaii, I felt good. I mean, I knew, but I felt good, right? I really feel good when I'm there. So I can't really rationally explain it, but that's definitely, and it's the same with my fiance and my daughter. And anyway, it was great because I think one of the reason also is very welcoming. So to answer your question more directly, at the beginning, I think the whole spiritual aspect and approach to life, which we're as society really lacking these days. I think people crave it a lot. And I felt that very much. I'd say the openness to the other, which was crucial, because I felt they were open to me, but just the way that the Hawaiian would open to the Maori and vice versa is also a very good lesson. The way you treat the land, you treat the elders, you treat the tradition. I think it's such basic values we all crave so much through all kinds of esoteric or new trends, but in the base, there's something there in the core that's really powerful that I kind of felt. And I think, I mean, much more than, if I just went to Hawaii and Aotearoa just on vacation or just in everyday life, I think because we were doing this show, of course, it was way more upfront, having all the blessings and the ceremony and the greetings and all that. But yeah, that's what really struck me. And I knew it when I was doing the show, but I realized now, 1 or 2 years later, doing other stuff, keeping to live my life, how significant this was compared to what I'm doing now or what I'll keep doing. So, no, it was huge. Honestly, I don't want to be too esoteric and say it changed me and all that, but it was really a life experience. It wasn't just like, there's all the other stuff I've done, and there's this one, and I think that's a big part of the difference between these projects and all the other ones.
Now, JF, you alluded earlier to some shifts in the timeline of the story you were telling. Chief of War was originally advertised as a limited series, but there's been strong buzz hinting at a possible season 2. What can you share with us about that?
Not much, honestly. I don't know. I mean, everyone's hopeful. Seriously, I know it's an expensive TV show to make. That's for sure. But yeah, that would be great. I mean, I couldn't hope more, and also to get the chance to, because it was quite challenging, and we learned a lot of stuff doing it. Usually we kind of master the craft of stage, backlot, you read a script. It's you know how things get done. This was crazy. We had to kind of invent how we did it, but to get the chance to do that a second time, knowing exactly that would be perfect. So I think we could make it even more beautiful, and they would probably get much more for their money. So hopefully, but I have no scoop for you.
All right. Well, while we wait for an announcement on that, JF, where next are we going to see your work?
I think it's going to be a series on Netflix I'm doing here in Europe right now, and it's based on a 1920 novel called The Age of Innocence. So it's a Scorsese movie that was done in 92, I think, and we're redoing. I can say that because I think it's out there. But so basically going back to the novel and reinterpreting so totally, it's still historic, but totally different.
Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
One last question for Halena and Kalewa. If people are interested in learning more about this historical period and Hawaiian culture in general, are there any resources you guys can suggest for folks where they might go?
Yeah, certainly. There is a book that recently came out that is a revision of, well, it's not a revision, it's more of a retranslation of an account of Hawaiian nationhood and the establishment of the Hawaiian nation under Kamehameha I by one of our historians called Samuel Kamako. He was a 19th century historian, but they've re-released his text with new translations. So the title of that book is Ke Kumu Aupuni, the Foundation of Hawaiian Nationhood. If you want a comprehensive rundown of all the events that took place, this is the book you'd want to get.
Yeah, and there's a second book by a Hawaiian historian, John Papa'i'i, called Fragments of History. That is a fantastic, smaller book, not quite as comprehensive, but he took a different look at some of these traditions that we see throughout the series. It's a great reader to kind of get an idea of what was happening pre-contact.
For those who are interested in those books, I will list the titles and authors in the show notes. JF, thank you for sharing these behind-the-scene details. On that note, we'll call it a wrap. Great having you guys here. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. Thank you. Nice to meet you guys.
Yes, thanks, JF. Great conversation.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Mahalo to everybody.
Mahalo. Bye-bye.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. My email address is skid@blowtheline.biz. It's B-I-Z. As I mentioned at the start, the release schedule over the next few months is TBD. But if you need a fix between new episodes, there are more than 270 in the archive. You can listen to past episodes at our website, blowtheline.biz, or wherever you get your podcasts. Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. If you want to support us, consider a purchase. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Other ways you can help. First, give us a positive rating wherever you get your podcasts. Second, tell your friends about an episode you enjoyed, because that's how we gain new listeners. All of that aside, whatever your engagement, the fact that you're still listening means a lot to me. Thanks again from Below the Line.